Hi guys, welcome back to the channel where history's quirkiest corners come alive. Today, we're diving into the strange world of medieval hygiene, from linen shirts that served as deodorant to bathhouses shuttered by plague fear. You'll learn why fresh underwear mattered more than soap, how people battled lice, and what became of chamber pots after dark. If that sounds intriguing, smash the like button, subscribe for more offbeat history, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Comment below and tell us which medieval hygiene hack shocked you most: pomander perfume, dry clean river laundry, or something else today. Just after that warm welcome picture, the camera gliding across a dimly lit stone corridor, torchlight flickering over damp walls as you and I step through a heavy oak door into an absent bathhouse, its empty tubs echoing with stories long forgotten. That door swing is our bridge from the video's introduction into the first most jarring truth of medieval hygiene by the late Middle Ages, an act we consider essential to health. Immersing our whole bodies in warm water had become, in the popular mind, a direct invitation for death to knock. What changed? How did the soothing soak that Roman physicians praised turn into something peasants, nobles, and even some doctors feared like plague itself? To answer, we have to follow the gossip of centuries, sift rumor from reason, and walk the crooked alley where science met superstition. The journey starts in healthier, happier foam. Early medieval Europe still dotted itself with balnea, public bathhouses modeled after Roman thermae. Pilgrims and townsfolk paid a small fee, shrugged off dusty cloaks, and lounged in communal wooden tubs while steam clouds mingled with spice-infused water. Monastic chronicles describe abbots inviting local poor to wash. On saints' feast days, a charitable tradition rooted in the belief that cleanliness reflected spiritual purity. Physicians of the 10th and 11th centuries wrote enthusiastically about bathing's power to balance the humors, promote digestion, and ease melancholy. For a while, the tub was a trusted tonic, and stepping into warm water felt like stepping into grace. But around the 14th century, Europe's confidence cracked. The Black Death swept through trading ports and market squares, erasing families overnight and replacing bathhouse laughter with cemetery bells. Unable to pinpoint Yersinia pestis, physicians grasped for explanations in the language they knew: miasmas, bad airs, and porous flesh. If invisible vapors carried disease, then any practice that opened pores wider than nature intended must be suspect. Medical treatises began, warning that prolonged heat dilates the skin's gates, allowing corrupt airs to penetrate into the vital faculties. These grim sentences traveled faster than scholarly Latin usually did. Town criers paraphrased them, priests wove them into sermons, and by the time a farmer heard the story while queuing for bread, the message was simple. Hot water is a mouth through which plague drinks you. The bathhouse's moral standing suffered alongside its medical one. Even before, the pestilence chroniclers grumbled about stews, an English nickname for London bathhouses that also means fish ponds, where the pairing of nakedness and mixed company supposedly coaxed sin into the water. Municipal records from Cologne, Paris, and Norwich show waves of ordinances shuttering these establishments, sometimes permanently, sometimes until God's scourge is lifted. City fathers blamed bathhouse promiscuity for spiritual decay. Physicians blamed heat for physical decay. Between the two, the communal bath lost its ground. Some owners converted their buildings into taverns, keeping only the kitchen's cauldron for washing select body parts: hands, face, maybe feet. Full-body immersion slipped from weekly routine to once-a-year luxury, usually on high holidays, when fear bowed to faith and scented herbs floated on festival steam. Inside private homes, the logic of limited exposure took over everyday habits. A merchant's wife might still heat water in an iron kettle, But instead of pouring it into a tub large enough to sit, she dipped a linen cloth, wrung it carefully, and performed what we'd call a sponge bath. She paid special attention to odor ports, armpits, groin behind the ears, then hurried to dry her skin before pores could drink foulness. Laundering her undershift became more important than washing her limbs. A fresh layer of linen was thought to wick sweat and protect the flesh beneath a kind of medieval deodorant plus filter. We know from household account books that wealthy families ordered dozens of shifts per person, signaling both status and devotion to this new cleanliness code. For laborers who could not afford such wardrobe depth, beating a single shirt against the river stones more often had to suffice. In either case, cloth, not soap, carried the burden of hygiene. Soap itself never disappeared, but its role narrowed. The hard tallow and alkali bricks produced in Marseille or Bristol spent more time pounding stains out of linens than lathering people. Apothecaries warned that strong lye scalds the complexion and thins the vital forces. Gentle olive oil soap existed, but cost a small fortune. Combined with chilly stone houses and scarce firewood skepticism of hot water, created a world where most Europeans stepped naked into a bath only during serious medical treatment, childbirth, or a pre-wedding purification rite. Even royalty adapted. In 1490, when Anne of Brittany prepared for her coronation, courtiers recorded amazement that she took 3 full baths within 8 days. Lavish. Yes, but also borderline daring, as if she'd tempted the very air to strike her down. What did this caution mean for the average villager's sense of self? Surprisingly, not absolute filth. By removing sweat with cloth sprinkling rose water and changing linen, often many medieval folk smelled no worse than an overworked modern commuter at day's end. Chroniclers occasionally praise individuals for sweet breath or clean attire, showing that standards of freshness still existed. Yet diaries also reveal comedic dread. A Florentine notary wrote that he postponed a bath after hearing a neighbor's cousin fell ill, following one choosing instead to dry scour the body with salt and sage. Fear rippled through communities in anecdotes more than medical papers, but its effect was undeniable. People accepted grit behind the knees as a safer alternative to an unlocked disease gateway. Of course not. Every authority agreed. Renegade physicians, many educated in Andalusian schools that preserved Greco-Arabic hygiene texts, insisted bathing remained beneficial when done moderately, and followed by swift drying in warm rooms. Some city councils, eager to revive tourism revenues, reopened bathhouses with rules caps on water temperature, separate hours for men and women, fines for lewd behavior. These reforms enjoyed pockets of success, especially in Italian spa towns where natural hot springs promised miraculous cures. Yet the pendulum never swung fully back before early modern plumbing, and germ theory rewrote the debate. Medieval Europe's caution thus became a long middle chapter, not the birth of bathing, not its renaissance, but its uneasy intermission lit by the shadow of plague. So when we look at crumbling bathhouse foundations today, we're seeing architecture shaped by fear as much as brick and mortar. Each broken tile whispers the same question medieval mothers asked while wringing washcloths by the hearth. Will cleanliness keep my family safe, or will it invite death to supper? The answer they chose, incomplete, anxious, but sincere, paved the cultural road that our story now follows. In the next section, we'll step beyond the bathhouse door to explore how linen herbs and surprisingly sophisticated laundry rituals filled the hygiene vacuum left by abandoned tubs. For now, let the echoes of cooling water remind us that health is never just about bodies. It's about the stories we tell when bodies suffer, and the choices we make when knowledge runs thin. The camera pans away from the deserted tubs we just explored, following a narrow cobblestone lane that winds toward a stone arch stamped with a faded relief of mermaids pouring pitchers of water. Once a proud sign for weary travelers in search of a scrub. Passing beneath the arch is like stepping into a time-lapse floor, mosaics chipped by centuries of footfall. Cedar benches splintered, where bathers once whispered gossip walls, still breathing faint aromas of rosemary-steeped steam. Yet the stillness screams louder than any echo. This is where the next chapter of our journey begins, inside the hollowed-out heart of Europe's bath culture. A culture that slowly bled away until only the wealthy could afford more than a perfunctory rinse. To understand how a communal soak became an endangered ritual, we need to rewind to the centuries just after Rome's fall. Imperial engineers had left behind an infrastructure of pipes, hippocausts, and reservoirs that for a while allowed even modest towns to keep the water hot and the crowds coming. People from every rung of society shared the same tepidarium benches, joking in a babel of dialects, while attendants poured perfumed oil along their shoulders. The experience was as social as it was hygienic an equalizer, where senators and smiths sweated side by side. But the very openness that made bathhouses alluring also made them susceptible to rumor and reproach, and the swirl of suspicion we met in our last segment quickly found fertile ground here. After the first waves of plague, municipal councils began scrutinizing bathhouses with the zeal of modern health inspectors, except their primary concern wasn't bacteria, but morality. Naked bodies under dim lamplight bred in their eyes an intimacy too dangerous for public virtue. Court records from Lubeck list fines for unchaste mingling in the stews, while London's 15th century regulations tried to curb night baths by shutting doors at dusk. Physicians lent medical gravitas to the crackdown. Pamphlets warned that damp heated air loosens the humors and invites sickness. And when fresh outbreaks of disease struck, officials closed the doors again, sometimes temporarily, sometimes for good. The closures aligned neatly with clerical sermons railing against vanity and flesh, creating a powerful feedback loop. Bathhouses were immoral because they made people ill. They made people ill because they were immoral. Yet economics proved just as decisive. Operating a large public facility meant constant fuel for the furnace-reliable aqueducts and attendants to scrub floors slick with olive oil and ash. As towns sank under the twin weights of war and epidemic, their treasuries shrank, and civic subsidies that had kept water flowing evaporated. Many proprietors pivoted to safer profits: alehouses, cloth markets, boarding rooms for pilgrims. Some buildings were repurposed as hospitals during plague times, only to be boarded up afterward, because the stench of sickness never quite washed from the plaster. By the early 1400s, travelers' journals that once counted bathhouses among a city's finest amenities instead remarked on their rarity. "No place to bathe here," a Flemish merchant wrote of Lyon in 1428, save the private chambers of the very rich. As communal doors slammed shut, the wealthy erected new ones behind tall courtyard walls. In Florence, merchant families installed marble tubs like status trophies, hiring servants to ferry buckets from kitchen hearths. Parisian notaries recorded elaborate inventories: silver ewers for scenting rinse water, cedarwood nail brushes, embroidered linen towels. Medical anxieties still lurked, so these baths weren't nightly indulgences. They were special events. A noblewoman might schedule her immersion before childbirth, trusting warm lavender water to open the passages while a midwife stood ready. A baron might soak prior to knighthood, or morbidly after recovering from plague as a sign of divine favor. Luxury transformed bathing from routine maintenance into ceremonial spectacle, its rarity enhancing its symbolism. In villages, meanwhile, bathing compressed into gestures. On feast days, Easter Pentecost, a local saint's anniversary, parish priests encouraged a quick wash in honor of God's house, and charities occasionally paid for barrels of hot water set up in churchyards. But most peasants contented themselves with the linen strategy we explored earlier, and with sharing household water in strict order. Father first, children last each step, cooling the tub and reaffirming the humble hierarchy of the medieval hearth. Travelers with few belongings turned to rivers at dawn, scrubbing skin behind boulders before setting out again. Even these quick dips drew suspicion. Chroniclers grumble about highway robbers who doused themselves in the Devil's Stream. For good luck, intertwining cleanliness with criminality. Still, the human desire for fellowship refused to die. Where official bans grew too suffocating, informal bath clubs sprouted in borderlands beyond city jurisdiction, much like today's pop-up saunas on remote beaches. In alpine valleys, villagers dug earthen pits near hot springs, roofed them with goat-hide tents, and shared steaming pools in the moonlight, singing hymns that blended pagan fertility rites with Christian psalms. Local magistrates often ignored these gatherings. They were too remote to police, and no one wanted to antagonize the shepherds who supplied vital wool. Such pockets of resistance preserved fragments of Rome's communal spirit, reminding us that culture rarely vanishes wholesale. It shrinks, adapts, and sometimes waits for kinder centuries. The gradual retreat of public bathhouses reshaped urban landscapes in subtler ways. Streets once aligned to siphon gray water toward bath drains were rerouted for marketplaces. Bathhouse cisterns became fish ponds or dye vats. Guilds that had specialized in furnace maintenance pivoted to brewing or glass-making fields that still needed large boilers. Meanwhile, architects lost touch with large-scale hydraulic design until Renaissance humanists began plumbing ancient texts for forgotten engineering tricks. The hiatus wasn't total. Monasteries maintained modest calefactories for the infirm, but knowledge atrophied enough that later builders treated running water as an innovation rather than an inheritance. For people who grew up after the closures, the idea of mass bathing acquired an almost mythical aura. Storytellers exaggerated the decadence of imperial baths, weaving tales of marble dragons spitting wine instead of water. Such exaggerations served a purpose by inflating past luxuries. They justified current austerity. If communal baths had been dens of wickedness and contagion, then their absence became proof of civilization's moral progress, no matter how itchy one's scalp felt under a wool hood. Historians sorting myth from fact must therefore read between the lines, untangling civic pride from genuine health reports, a task made harder by the way later Victorians projected their own prudish anxieties back onto the medieval mind. And yet, threads of revival coiled in the darkness. Diplomatic travelers returning from the Ottoman Empire spoke of Turkish hammams, where patrons emerged scented and vigorous, challenging European assumptions about hot steam. Early modern doctors, like Ambroise Paré, began correlating cleanliness with lower rates of wound infection. Slowly, whispers of Renaissance grew. But that is a story for another episode. What matters here is that Europe spent almost 3 centuries in a bathing limbo, a period when social class determined whether you soaked in a cedar tub trimmed with iron bands or merely dabbed a cloth behind your ears. As our camera lingers on the cracked tile underfoot, think of it not as ruin, but as silent testimony. These baths weren't killed solely by disease or dogma. They were victims of an intertwined web of fear, economics, and evolving notions of propriety. The absence they left behind forced people to innovate with linen herbs and ritual workarounds that set the stage for every hygiene hack we explore next. In the following segment, we'll trace one of those hacks to the banks of a roaring river where washerwomen turned laundry day into both community theater and an unlikely shield against odor. For now, let the abandoned pools remind us that cleanliness, like any social practice, is fragile. When infrastructure crumbles, the privilege of feeling clean contracts, and the line between necessity and luxury sharpens like a razor on a whetstone. The camera lingers on those abandoned cedar tubs for a heartbeat longer, then pivots toward a sun-splashed courtyard beyond the bathhouse wall. The kind of private space where most Europeans learned to compromise with cleanliness once public soaks became rarer than comet sightings. Laundry lines zigzag overhead like pennant banners, each length of linen snapping in the breeze. A woman steps into frame sleeves, rolled wooden bucket, steaming faintly at her feet. She dips a square of cloth, wrings it tight, and begins a slow, practiced scrub along the inside of her elbow. This intimate ritual part, massage part prayer, is the bridge from Point Two's vanished bath culture to the ingenious dry wash routines that defined Point Three. Imagine for a moment that you are her apprentice. The year is 1483. The village a speck outside Chartres, and the parish well is still the closest thing to indoor plumbing. Every dawn, you heat 2 kettles, one of rainwater, one of wine vinegar steeped overnight with sage rosemary and a pinch of alum. The herbs aren't random. Local healers swear. Sage warms the bones. Rosemary lifts melancholia. Alum closes the pores, the alchemy of smell and superstition distilled into a portable potion. When the water reaches finger warm, you pour it into a lipped basin, dilute it with the vinegar infusion, and fetch 3 pristine linen cloths laid out to dry by the hearth. The first cloth, the strong wipe, is for limbs, most exposed to work forearms, calves, the back of the neck. You scour in small circles, chasing yesterday's dirt while coaxing circulation to the surface. If you were lucky enough to own olive oil soap, you might work up a thin lather on the cloth's corner, but most days, friction alone suffices. A moment of shiver follows as cold morning air hits damp skin, which is precisely why haste matters. Linger too long, and bad airs may slip through those opened pores, at least according to the physicians who shut the bathhouses. Quick swipes, brisk drying with the cloth's opposite edge, then onto cloth number 2. This second cloth, the sweet wipe, is light, almost transparent. It drinks from the basin again, but now you add a droplet of rosewater, or if pennies allow, imported orange blossom distillate from Seville. Its job is scent, and finish a faint floral veil to counter sweat's metallic tang. Here you target odor ports, armpits, groin. Behind the ears, areas polite conversation never addresses, but everyone quietly monitors. In noble households, ladies' maids might powder these spots afterward with crushed iris root. Villagers rely on the lingering rosemary note alone. Either way, the sweet wipe proves that medieval folk did not shrug at body odor. They strategized against it with the tools at hand. Enter cloth number 3, the seal wipe. Dipped in plain cool water, wrung nearly dry, it closes the ritual the way a cold rinse finishes a modern spa treatment. The shock is deliberate. Physicians claimed chilly water contracts. The flesh locking out miasmas stirred up by the warm wash. You pat, not rub, letting droplets bead before they vanish into the warming sun. In under 15 minutes, you have washed, perfumed, and protected yourself, all without touching a bathtub or stripping naked outside your chamber door. But the procedure doesn't end with skin. It continues in linen, the undershift chemise or braise that hug the body closer than any spouse. Medieval tailors chose linen for one startling reason. The flax fibers are hollow, absorbing sweat, like miniature capillary tubes. Slip into a fresh shift after the seal wipe, and it acts like a full-body blotter, wicking moisture away so thoroughly that commentators of the day swore a clean shirt could sip uncleanliness from the skin. Our modern noses might dissent, but period medical texts agree frequent shirt changes were prescribed the way doctors prescribe antibiotics today. Even the poorest tried to own a spare or two. The wealthiest flaunted wardrobes boasting a shift for each sun's rising proof that they could stay dry, fragrant, and socially untouchable. Clean linen was status, but also shield. City ordinances from Florence to Lubeck sometimes demanded that food market vendors wear freshly laundered shifts under outer tunics, the medieval equivalent of a health inspection badge. Monks at Cluny washed their cowls less often than their undershirts, despite rule of St. Benedict strictures against vanity. And on the eve of battle, knights stripped to linen so disease-watching surgeons could look for pox or boils, telltale signs of infection, before armor sealed everything in metal. Of course, keeping all that linen fresh posed its own challenge, one our camera now follows as it leaves the courtyard and winds downhill to the riverbank. There, washerwomen gather like a percussion ensemble, beating fabric against smooth stones in steady rhythm. Buckets of chamber lie aged urine, a potent ammonia-rich bleach soak. Stubborn stains, while kettles of lye soap bubble over wooden fires. What looks like drudgery doubles as social hub gossip flows faster than the current songs rise to drown fatigue, and colorfully patched aprons become banners of identity. Laundry Day is a minor festival, complete with unspoken codes. Never let a stranger's shift touch yours lice patrol. Always rinse downstream and trade herb secrets graciously. The river itself becomes an extension of the communal bathhouse Europe, once lost. Only now the water caresses cloth instead of skin. Back up the slope, our apprentice hangs the newly laundered shifts on a hazel rack by the garden. She sprinkles dried lavender between folds to deter moths and add an extra layer of fragrance. Later, when family members pull those shirts over their heads, they inhale the countryside fields. Flowers, firewood, smoke, woven into their daily armor. They may never soak in cedar tubs again, but they carry a portable cocoon of cleanliness wherever they go. These rituals spilled into the herbal notebooks of wise women and apothecaries. Recipes survive for wipe-water blends. Juniper for soldiers to harden sinew, chamomile for the elderly to soften stiffness, mint. For clergy to freshen breath and brow alike. 1475. English Tract even recommends wormwood infusion for travelers crossing marshlands, swearing it repels mosquitoes, and by extension, malaria, an early nod to insect-borne disease, before germ theory had words for such threats. That same text advises airing linen on hawthorn hedges because thorns scrape corruption from the weave, a poetic image that turns a hedge into a giant antimicrobial scrub brush. Critics of the era sometimes mocked these measures as half-steps a bath that never wets the toes. Yet archaeology supports their efficacy. Studies of textile fragments from London's medieval landfill at Baynard's Castle show surprisingly low bacterial loads, likely thanks to alkaline soap residues and sun bleaching. Skeletons interred with linen shrouds often display fewer skin infections than those wrapped in wool, evidence that flax's famed breathability mattered long before microbes earned their Latin names. None of this is to paint medieval hygiene as rosy. Lice still set up camp. Sweat still fermented under chainmail. Winters made warm water a luxury once more. But the dry wash culture demonstrates a resilience we rarely credit. Stripped of grand infrastructure, ordinary people engineered a toolkit of cloth herbs and communal labor that kept illness at bay more often than not. They did so while telling stories, woman to woman over laundry stones, father to child, while dabbing sage water on scrapes, embedding hygiene in the folk memory that would one day prime Europe for soap revolutions and plumbing renaissances. As the sun dips behind the village steeple, our camera settles on a final tableau, rows of white linen, glowing gold in last light, fluttering like sails ready to carry centuries forward. The flutter links us to our next chapter, where those same linen sails and the rivers beneath them become stages for tales of washerwoman solidarity and early labor unions. For now, remember this cleanliness in the medieval world did not drown with the bathhouses. It dried its hands on a fresh shirt, adjusted a sprig of rosemary behind the ear, and carried on. Soft morning haze still clings to the riverbank, where linen flutters in orderly rows. Meanwhile, a different rhythm rises from the village green, the dull thud of paddles stirring a soapy brew in a blackened cauldron. Furthermore, that cauldron full of shimmering fat wood ash and brine marks the next logical chapter in our medieval hygiene journey, because cloth alone could not bear every burden of cleanliness. Consequently, as public baths vanished and dry washing took center stage, soap quietly stepped from the wings to claim its supporting role. The recipe looks simple, therefore deceptive. Rendered mutton tallow meets rainwater filtered through last night's hearth ashes, and the resulting lye sizzles like some restless spirit. However, any soap maker will tell you that timing is treacherous. Stir too late, and the fats refuse to marry. Stir too soon, and the lye bites back caustic enough to ghost bones. Nevertheless, villagers risked singed fingers because the reward, a crumbly brick that could lift grease from linen, was worth the gamble. In fact, travelers from Marseille to Lubeck smelled out soap markets the way we hunt for coffee, following a faint nutty tang that drifted through alleyways. Take for example a mid-15th century trading ledger from Pisa, listing olive stone oil soap for 2 florins the weight. That greenish Castilian luxury cut gently enough for hands, making it the darling of apothecaries. By contrast, most northern kitchens churned out rough tallow blocks, better suited to laundry boards than skin. Likewise, monastery workshops balanced somewhere in between, substituting almond oil when charity coffers brimmed. The point is that soap types mirrored social tiers fine for the few, functional for the many, instead of offering a universal scrub. The way people used those bricks tells us even more. Washerwomen shaved slivers into kettles, beating linens until froth frothed higher than river foam. Knights dissolved flakes in wooden basins to scour chainmail links. Priests dampened the corner of a stole before wiping altar rails. Afterwards, the soap went back to its shelf, rarely touching bare flesh. In addition, medical treatises whispered that strong lye stripped the vital spirits from the skin, a warning mothers repeated, while dabbing babies with diluted vinegar. Even so, a few daredevil sailors, craving the sting of true cleanliness, scrubbed scalp to heel and bragged about it in taverns. On the other hand, the upper crust treated soap as both practical cleanser and status scent. They ordered bricks infused with lavender costus root or imported musk, then carved the family crest onto each bar before locking them in cedar chests. Gradually, the fragrance leached into household linens, leaving subtle signatures that gossip alone could not fake. Similarly, civic leaders saw political opportunity guild charters in London and Cologne granted soap boilers tax breaks if they supplied hospitals during plague years, weaving public health into municipal identity. The economics of soap-shaped geography, thus nudging towns toward rivers thick with beechwoods and cattle pastures, raw materials in walking distance. Soap kilns rose beside tanners and dyers, all feeding on the same caustic chemistry, still venting acrid clouds that made neighbors pinch noses yet trust the final product. At the same time, trade routes thickened barges hauled ash from Baltic forests, galleys ferried olive oil across the Mediterranean, and horse caravans lugged sea salt inland. These movements braided regions together long before postal systems turning fat and lye into silent diplomats. Later, royal decrees tried to harness that momentum. Queen Isabella of Castile capped the price of Castile soap to curb profiteering, while the Hanseatic League imposed purity standards, fining any merchant whose bricks fizzed too violently in water. Eventually, such regulations birthed early trademarks, a stamped dolphin here, a crowned rose there so wary customers could spot counterfeits. Paradoxically, this quest for uniformity preserved local quirks. Marseille soap remained soft and green. Bristol bars stayed husky and gray. The cultural symbolism deepened notably when poets began equating soap with moral revelation. One English ballad likens confession to rubbing the soul with lye until lies run clear. So parish priests placed soap shards in offering bowls on Maundy Thursday, encouraging the faithful to scrub both conscience and palm before Easter Mass. Beyond that, midwives kept a sliver beneath birthing stools, ready to wash newborns in warm suds, an earthy baptism preceding the priest's holy water. Remember our apprentice from the linen courtyard. Earlier, she learned to wield cloth like armor against odor. Now she learns to ration soap like coin. She stores the family's lone bar inside a clay jar layered with sage leaves, removing it only on market eve. She grates a thumb-sized curl into boiling water dunks each shift and watches stains loosen as if persuaded by song. Thereafter, she strains the gray soup into a trench. Outside careful that livestock never sip the lye-laced runoff. The cycle repeats every 4th day in summer, every 8th in winter, when snow water dulls the lather. Soap is still expensive accordingly, each shred travels far. The same lather that frees embroidery from axle grease also degreases. Cooking pots, brightens pewter spoons, and on feast days washes the carved wooden Christ above the mantel. Surprisingly, these many tasks leave the brick barely diminished, a testament to both frugality and respect. Importantly, the apprentice knows that when the bar finally dwindles to a nub, she'll boil the scrap with sheep hooves and start the crucible again, because waste is a luxury no one can afford. And now, our camera drifts from the kiln's smoky maw to a silent loft where soap bricks cool on pine racks, chalked with the maker's secret rune. Their chalky surfaces catch moonlight like dominoes hinting at stories yet to unfold. Finally, that silver glow ushers us toward the next topic. How medieval folk battled parasites chasing lice with vinegar combs and brewing beer shampoos strong enough to daze a flea. But before we comb through those tangles, remember the lesson etched in every soap cauldron. Cleanliness may bend under fear, shortage, or superstition, yet it never snaps. It adapts from scalding tubs to linen wipes to alkaline bricks. Each era lathering its own answer to the timeless question, how shall we stay clean enough to carry on? The moonlit racks of cooling soap bricks fade from view, and our lens tilts upward to a thatched roof, where a different battle against grime plays out, this time on the human scalp. Once cloth and caustic lye had done their duty, medieval folk still faced a relentless itching frontier hair teeming with lice nits. And in warmer regions, the occasional flea hitchhiking under a felt cap. Picking up exactly where those alkaline bricks left off point 5 unpacks the surprisingly inventive hair care arsenal that flourished when shampoo as we know it was centuries away. First came prevention, born of necessity and fashion alike. In urban centers, women wound long tresses into tight braids, then covered them with linen wimples or woolen veils. Men favored coifs, close-fitting caps that doubled as filters against rogue insects. These coverings weren't just modesty. They trapped stray hairs, limited direct contact in crowded spaces, and crucially could be boiled or roasted over embers to kill stowaway parasites. The richer one's wardrobe, the more layers available for rotation, echoing the linen as armor logic we explored in point 3, and the soap economy lessons of point 4. A noblewoman might own silken snoods, perfumed with clove oil, whereas a plowman relied on a single felt hood, freshened nightly with smoke from juniper twigs. Different fabrics, same goal: deny the louse a hospitable kingdom. Still, no head covering was foolproof. And so medieval hygiene advanced to step 2, deterrent the invader. Here, vinegar reigned supreme. Housewives steeped rosemary, thyme, or rue in cheap wine vinegar, then warmed the mixture and massaged it into the scalp. Contemporary herbals claimed the sour rinse closed the pores and stunned creeping beasts, but its real power was acetic acid, dislodging the waxy glue that held nits to hair shafts. After the rinse, the bather sat near the hearth, while a friend deployed the medieval all-star tool, a fine-toothed bone comb. These combs, often carved from cow ribs or boxwood, were masterpieces of patience teeth, set so close a single grain of barley barely slipped between them. Drawn slowly from nape to crown, they scraped loose eggs into the comb's grooves. Every few strokes, the operator flicked the harvest into a bowl of salt water, where nothing crawled out alive. When vinegar proved scarce, thrifty households turned to beer wash. Brewer's yeast left sediment rich in mild acids and alcohol, 2 natural enemies of lice. Mixed with river water and warmed in an iron pot, the frothy liquid doubled as a gentle cleanser, lifting sweat and hearth smoke lodged among strands. Chronicles from Prague describe bath attendants offering ale dips to merchants after market day, followed by a brisk dry rub with linen to keep chill away. The practice also spurred an early form of hair conditioner. Hop resins left a faint sheen and easier comb. Through a medieval cousin to the silicone gloss modern bottles promise. Even in monasteries where vanity ranked as sin, head hygiene mattered. Benedictine rules mandated regular tonsure trims, not just for symbolism, but also for sanitation. Felicitas, the infirmarian at St. Gall Abbey, noted in a 12th century notebook that shaving the crown bleeds the louse population by half. When outbreaks still occurred, monks dusted scalps with powdered pennyroyal and mint herbs believed to offend the breath of parasites. Skeptical modern noses might chuckle, yet chemical analyses of pennyroyal confirm presence of poulagone, an insect deterrent. What medieval healers lacked in microscopy, they offset with centuries of observation. If goatherds rubbed mint on hides to ward off flies, why not test it on human hair? In royal courts, hair became both canvas and laboratory. Court physicians to Queen Isabella of Castile recommended emulsions of beaten egg yolk and rosewater for lustrous shine, the lecithin acting as a natural surfactant. French apothecaries bottled orris root powder blended with starch. When sprinkled into the hairline and brushed out, it soaked up oil and left an iris scent that masked barnyard odors. These luxuries trickled down through gift economies. A laundress rewarded for spotless doublets might receive a thimble of scented starch to share with sisters at the wash house, illustrating how even elite products seeped into common ritual over time. Of course, desperate times demanded harsher cures. If lice swarmed beyond tolerance, some shaved everything. Legal rolls from 14th century Rouen mention barbers paid 2 deniers to clear the heads of orphanage wards during summer heat waves, an act equal parts hygiene and social control, since a bald head was easier to inspect for fever spots. Post-shave camphor oil sealed the deal, burning faintly on raw skin and advertising the child's parasite-free status to neighbors. Linking back to Point 4's soap economy, these hair rituals reveal another market ripple. Soap makers realized that combing sessions worked best when hair was slightly tacky. Too much grease and nits slid too little, and strands snapped. Thus, they produced soap waters, weak lye solutions sold in pitchers for just enough degreasing before vinegar or beer baths. Guild charters in Bristol allowed soap boilers to hawk this byproduct at half price, widening access to scalp care for middling buyers. Commerce, in other words, followed the itch. All these practices culminated weekly in what one 1492 diary calls the Great Net Hunt, a family gathering as regular as Sunday supper. Mothers sat on stools, daughters knelt between their knees, and storytelling filled the air. Saints' legends, local scandals, riddles to keep boredom at bay. In that communal choreography, hygiene bonding and oral tradition braided together like the very plaits they untangled. The etiquette hunt carved memory grooves. Children grew up associating cleanliness not with solitary vanity, but with collective vigilance, an ethic that survived long after modern shampoos dethroned vinegar. By the cusp of the Renaissance, visitors from the Ottoman Empire, where steam baths and henna treatments thrived, remarked on Europe's evolving headgear and surprisingly fragrant hair tonics. Their travelogues nudged Western apothecaries toward distilling stronger floral waters and experimenting with imported spices such as cinnamon leaf oil. Eventually, these exchanges would birth perfumed pomades that ushered in Baroque wigs and powdered coiffures. But that flamboyant chapter lies beyond today's scope. What matters here is the bridge from soap cauldrons point 4 to the combs and concoctions that kept medieval scalps serviceable, even when full baths were a rarity. As dusk settles over our imaginary village, the camera zooms out under a pear tree. Our apprentice hangs bone combs to dry their ivory teeth, glinting beside pouches of crushed herbs. In the background, soap-scented steam still curls from the communal kettle. Closer braids swing freshly tightened, and children scratch less than they did at sunrise. These layered scenes remind us that medieval hygiene functioned like a patchwork quilt, vinegar squares stitched to soap scraps. Lithe threads woven into linen, every piece compensating for what the others lacked. And with that quilt firmly around their shoulders, our forebears marched on to confront yet another frontier of cleanliness, the daunting task of oral care, where salt charcoal and frayed willow twigs waited to polish smiles in an age before porcelain and paste. Our camera lingers on the pear tree scene from point 5, bone combs. Drying children scratching less, then dips toward the hearth, where a clay brazier glows. A boy grins as he lifts the embers and darts inside teeth, sparking white in the firelight. That grin bridges scalp hygiene to a new frontier medieval oral care, a daily duel with foul breath, cracked enamel, and pain that could cripple a plowman or stop a knight. With no toothpaste, nylon bristles, or Novocaine, households forged a makeshift arsenal of salt charcoal herbs and rigid habit to keep mouths usable. At dawn, the embers become medicine. Mother sprinkles oak charcoal over a flat stone, adds coarse sea salt and dried mint, then pounds the mix into a gray-black dust. Each family member tears a linen strip, wraps it round a finger, taps the powder, and scrubs upper teeth first. Inner surfaces next. Finally, the molars, where yesterday's barley porridge hides. Salt scours plaque charcoal, absorbs odor mint. Leaves a brisk tingle that signals success. The spent strip heads straight for the washtub. Spit, they know, spreads sickness fast. Chew sticks step in when linen runs short. Hazel willow or imported orange wood twigs are gnawed until their ends bloom like tiny brushes. The fibers polish enamel surprisingly well. Willow carries natural salicin that calms swollen gums, while orange wood perfumes the breath with a citrus note, rare in northern markets. Sailors swap fresh sticks at exorbitant prices, knowing that 4 weeks at sea without cleaning breeds rot no breeze can hide. The choicest branches, veterans insist, come from limbs cut at sunrise while sap still hums. Rinsing liquid reflects class and geography. Villagers spit into dust and swig diluted cider vinegar. Townsfolk use rainwater scented with sage. Merchants flaunt mouthwaters of rosemary, frankincense, and clove sold in small ceramic flasks. At banquets, traders sip gargle and spit into a cup held by a page. Part hygiene, part brag. Physicians praise these rinses for refreshing the heart through the palate, warning that stagnant breath foretells fever. Even skeptics comply when plague whispers spread. Despite precautions, decay strikes often and brutally. Enter the tooth drawer, half barber, half jester, rolling into markets with a painted cart and strings of extracted molars swinging like trophies. He greases forceps with goose fat, offers a swig of spiced wine, cracks a joke, then yanks in one decisive twist. Speed is his mercy. Applause his advertisement. Bruges ledgers record extra pennies when pain produced only a single scream, for each shriek reminds onlookers to scrub harder that night. Prevention therefore matters. Monks at Salerno recommend rubbing gums with honey and powdered myrrh to harden the flesh and sweeten the breath. Peasant mothers brew nettle tea, claiming its vapors cleanse mouth and stomach alike. Winter firesides inspire beeswax pellets rolled with fennel seed. Chewing them keeps saliva flowing when cold air parches throats. Greater saliva healers argue washes away rotten morsels before they fester. The logic is crude, yet effective. Keep things moving and stench, and the demons it heralds moves on. Diet shapes dental fortune just as surely. Europe eats little refined sugar, sparing many cavities, yet millstones leave grit in coarse bread that scratches enamel thin. Bakers who can afford extra sieving advertise white loaves gentle to the teeth, and nobles pay handsomely. Common folk polish with powdered oyster shell, a mild abrasive that brightens smiles but risks over-thinning if used too often. Even risk feels kinder than the tooth drawer's iron. Oral care doubles as family bonding, much like the nightly ant hunt. Parents recite rhymes, north to southeast to west. Scrub them all and scrub your best to set tempo while younger mouths practice. Stories flow saints who heal toothache with a touch merchants whose rotten jaws cost fortunes lovers won by the scent of mint. Thus, habits fuse with memory. Skipping a scrub feels like skipping grace. When salt prices soar, households still save a pinch for mouth powder before seasoning soup. Courtship amplifies the stakes. Burgundian love letters admire breath like dawn over apple blossoms. Courtiers suck candied anise seeds before dances filling halls with a warm licorice cloud. A troubadour ranks suitors by scent, placing vine-bright breath above silk tunics. Such verses nudge even hardened soldiers toward the rinse basin, feeding demand for imported spices that make mouth powders exotic and therefore desirable. Commerce follows the heart. Twilight deepens. Linen still flaps soap. Cools and our apprentice slides the charcoal tube beside combs and lye shards. Skin hair and now breath, each sense guarded by its own homegrown science. Each ritual a stitch in the quilt of survival. Tomorrow we'll trace the water that threads them all wells, cisterns, and wooden conduits that must stay fresher than the ground they spring from. Tonight, the family sleeps, tasting mint and smoky salt, confident they've kept decay at arm's length for one more day. Morning breaks on our imagined village with a low clatter of wooden buckets slapping against one another, a sound as vital to medieval life as church bells. The boy who carried charcoal for last night's tooth powder now crosses the yard with his sisters, balancing an ash-smudged yoke across his shoulders. Its iron hooks grip two leather pails, still slick from yesterday's rinse water. Their first task is to refill them at the communal well before the queue grows long. Breath still tingles of mint and salt from the dawn scrub, described in point 6. But that freshness will fade fast if the day's water proves foul. Most rural settlements relied on shallow hand-dug wells lined with wicker or stone. In towns, deeper shafts tapped cleaner aquifers, but proximity to cesspits often turned blessing to curse. City councils from Paris to Prague therefore appointed well wardens who inspected coverings, policed latrine distance, and levied stiff fines on bakers or dyers caught sluicing waste downhill. Charters detail measurements in paces 30, from a slaughterhouse 40, from a tanner's vat. Quaint but earnest attempts to keep putrefaction out of drinking cups. Violations filled court rolls, and more importantly, neighborhood gossip. For no one forgave a neighbor whose carelessness soured every pot of porridge. Even diligent oversight could not guarantee purity, so medieval households learned to make suspicious water safer by changing its nature. The simplest method was heat kettles swung over hearths at dawn, producing enough boiled water to cool for children's drinks and the evening's tooth rinses. Boiling cost fuel, however, so the more economical fix was fermentation. Brewers transformed weak wort into small beer, an everyday table drink, with just enough alcohol and hops to inhibit pathogens while supplying calories. Monastic chronicles report daily rations of a gallon per monk scandalous, until one recalls its alcohol content hovered around modern soft cider. Likewise, vintners sold dampened wine, a mix of 1 part vintage to 3 parts water-trusting acidity to tame microbes. Thus, the same vines and casks that flavored last night's dental rinse doubled as safeguards against dysentery. Rainwater collection offered another line of defense. Manor houses installed lead-lined cisterns beneath gutter spouts, channeling runoff through rudimentary sand filters before it reached the kitchen barrel. Urban elites paid masons to build rooftop catch basins faced with glazed tile, a luxury that spared servants the trek to public conduits. London's Great Conduit, finished in 1245, piped spring water 2 miles into carved stone fountains. Records show sheriffs guarding its spouts on feast days when demand spiked. The city's guilds held parades to celebrate repairs because steady flow meant healthier apprentices and smoother commerce. Water, quite literally, was civic pride, cast in liquid form. Guarding supply was only half the equation. Removing what had been fouled mattered just as much. Castle architects placed garderobes, latrine shafts on exterior walls, so waste dropped into moats where scavenging fish and microbial action diluted the stench. Townhouses dug cesspits lined with clay. When they filled night soil, men shoveled contents into carts and trundled them beyond the walls to fertilize fields. Ordinances timed these runs after dark to spare day noses, yet travelers still wrote of gagging encounters when wind shifted wrong. Villagers without pits simply emptied chamber pots at dawn, hollering "Gardes low, mind the water" as courtesy. By law, it was a warning. By custom, it was communal choreography as predictable as roosters, fetching and paying for water-shaped social rhythms. In prosperous quarters, water sellers patrolled with horse-drawn barrels, charging by the bucket, and gossiping as they poured. Poorer families queued at public wells, where news spread faster than the rope dropped. Anxious brides learned a neighbor's brewing secrets while counting turns. Journeymen heard of jobs upriver. Even clandestine courtships blossomed over shared dipper ladles. Water thus served as both lifeline and bulletin board, reinforcing community bonds that made hygiene's daily grind bearable. Yet fear always lurked. Chronicles recount bloody fluxes sweeping towns after spring floods muddied wells. Clergy blamed divine wrath. Physicians blamed corrupted air, and laborers blamed the well-keeper who skimmed too many pennies to cover repairs. In response, households hung rue, or wormwood, over wellheads, herbs thought to repel evil vapors. Some painted protective crosses on bucket lids. Others dropped silver coins into cisterns, trusting metal's mystical purity. These gestures, half faith and half science, echoed the mint leaves in tooth powder and the rosemary in scalp vinegar, layer upon layer of modest defense. Craftspeople depended on steady, clean water too. Fullers needed it soft for finishing wool. Dyers needed it limpid to keep colors true. Millers needed it abundant to turn wheels. A drought could bankrupt an entire guild, while a polluted stream could ruin a year's cloth export. Thus, trade ordinances devoted surprisingly detailed clauses to water rights, each clause a reminder that health and wealth shared a single pipeline. Guild elders sometimes hired diviners to trace hidden springs, a mystical prelude to modern hydrology, because a new well meant new jobs. Fewer fevers and sweeter ale. Our lens returns to the boy and his siblings now climbing from the well trench arms, trembling under their refilled pails. A quick sniff confirms the water smells of nothing but cold earth good enough. Back home, Mother skims a cupful for breakfast porridge, then sets the rest near the hearth, where heat will chase lurking chills. By evening, the same water will dilute vinegar for mouth rinses splash across the table to wipe crumbs, simmer beans, and douse stray sparks from the fire. Each cycle tightens the thread, weaving skincare, hair care, oral care, and sustenance into one unbroken fabric. Point 7, then, is the story of that thread, how medieval people managed the water that underpinned every other hygiene hack we have explored. Their methods, boiling, brewing, cistern building, waste hauling, were born of equal parts necessity, observation, and superstition. They lacked microscopes, yet knew foul water felled children faster than swords. They lacked chlorine, yet brewed beer that killed pathogens in the mash tun. They lacked sewers, yet organized night soil brigades to keep streets passable. Their improvisation kept villages alive long enough for later eras to lay pipes, tap pumps, and finally glimpse the invisible germs that haunted every bucket. As twilight settles, our apprentice closes the cottage door against evening damp. Buckets rest by the hearth, guarded like treasure. Tomorrow, they will start the cycle again, just as they will boil lye for laundry grind salt, for teeth, and warm vinegar for scalp care. But in the next episode, we will slip beyond the village boundary to follow what the water carries away: the scents of life, the reek of refuse, and the surprisingly sophisticated perfumes. Pomander's allumed powders, smoke baths that medieval folk devised to wrestle odor itself. Until then, remember, freshness began not with soap or linen, but with a simple drop of clean cold water hoisted at dawn against the weight of all that could go wrong. Buckets slosh against the cottage wall like subdued drums, while dawn's first breeze snakes through the yard, carrying the sharp scent of last night's hearth smoke. Cattle pens beyond the hedgerow, and the earthy coolness of freshly hoisted well water. That draft reminds everyone that clean water, Point 7's hard-won treasure, is only half the battle. It can rinse a face or slake a thirst, but it cannot keep the human body from announcing itself in waves of sweat, tallow, garlic, and stable dust. As our apprentice strains to set the pails on their stone stand, her mother is already thinking 2 steps ahead, untying the waxed linen pouch that holds the family's most precious weapon against odor. A walnut-sized pomander carved with tiny quatrefoil vents. She passes it beneath each child's nose, a ritual as steady as grace before meals, then threads it onto her belt, so its mingled notes of clove myrrh and dried rose will hover all day like an invisible shield. When medieval folk spoke of sweetness, they rarely meant sugar. They meant the absence of stench in crowded markets or smoky halls where fresh air was a commodity. Sweat itself wasn't despised. In fact, physicians praised heavy perspiration as the body's way of expelling corrupt humors, but the lingering musk that clung to wool tunics after labor threatened social standing. Enter the arsenal of aromatic defenses. Wealthy townspeople carried pomanders of gilded silver packed with expensive ambergris or civet, and warmed them discreetly in palm or pocket, so scent would bloom with body heat. Country families copied the idea in humbler materials, hollow crab apples filled with sage and marjoram, or coarse cloth bundles soaked overnight in vinegar and alum, then sun-dried until they hardened into portable sachets. The goal was not to mask odor entirely, few had that luxury, but to thread pleasant notes through the inevitable animal undertones, a harmony rather than a cover-up. Handkerchiefs stepped in as both accessory and emergency filter. A lady attending Mass might dab her temples with a square of fine linen steeped in lavender water, then hold it to her nose when incense and packed pews turned the nave air thick. Knights on campaign tucked sweat cloths under their breastplates, changing them after battle, and hanging the soiled pieces over campfire smoke spiked with juniper to kill rankness. Records from a 1479 Paris guild show perfumers selling nace whips, coarse cotton squares, impregnated with distilled rosemary and vinegar, to city watchmen whose rounds took them past latrines and tanneries. These cloths were no fashion frill. They were survival tools that let men stand post without retching. Powders offered a drier solution where water was scarce. Alum potassium aluminum sulfate, mined from volcanic soils, proved a minor miracle, astringent enough to constrict pores and slow bacterial growth light. Enough to scatter into armpits or inside shoe leather without clumping. Apothecaries ground alum with crushed iris roots, cedar sawdust, or even powdered pearl to sell as body sand. Users patted it on after their vinegar wipe-downs, leaving a faint mineral film that caught sweat before it soured. Village barbers mixed cheaper blends of ash and ground sage. Though less elegant, they neutralized odors just the same, and left a silvery sheen that peasants joked made them look like moonlit ghosts at the harvest dance. Smoke itself doubled as perfume. In winter, when baths were rarer than sunshine, households built smoke closets, narrow alcoves above the hearth flue, where clothing could hang in a slow current of aromatic fumes. Poplar chips, rosemary sprigs, and dried orange peel smoldered on the embers, and garments left for 2 hours emerged noticeably drier and faintly spiced. Some monasteries institutionalized the practice, rotating cowls through fumatoriums alongside library parchment to repel mold. Even castles joined the trend inventories from Richard II's court list. Cedarwood braziers rolled into great halls during banquets, so silk sleeves and fur trim would carry the king's preferred blend of benzoin resin and rosewood. Not coincidentally, guests left smelling more royal than when they arrived, a lingering reminder of hospitality and hierarchy. The logic behind all this fragrance engineering traces straight back to Point 7's obsession with water quality foul smells. Whether from wells or skin, were warnings of decay that could sicken bodies and reputations alike. If clean water guarded life from the inside, scent rituals guarded social life from the outside. They also bridged medical theory and faith. Herbals claimed that sweet aromas strengthened the heart and comforted the brain, while sermons likened spiritual purity to the good smell of sanctity. During plague years, citizens swung pomanders like censers, believing fragrant smoke repelled the same miasmas that boiling and brewing fought in drink. Children absorbed these customs early. A 6-year-old might learn to rub sage leaves on pulse points before her first festival, just as she learned to chew mint for fresher breath. Boys apprenticed to tanners were issued cheap alum cakes to counter the reek of hides. Failure to use them could invite fines or worse ridicule in the guild hall. Over time, individuals developed signature scents that neighbors recognized the way we recognize voices. A charcoal maker's wife might forever smell of juniper pitch and violet, while a miller's cloak carried flower dust mingled with cinnamon bark he used to keep rodents from the grain. Odor became a kind of invisible heraldry. Commerce thrived on this olfactory economy. Spice roots funneled clove, cinnamon, and musk through Venice, where perfumers distilled them into waters sold in tinted glass flasks no bigger than a sparrow's egg. Northern merchants added local twists, pine resin rue and honey, and snapped up empty wine bottles to bottle their own nose waters for fairs. Even physicians joined the market, prescribing custom blends to treat melancholy or ward off fevers, effectively turning perfume into medicine and medicine into luxury. An outbreak of English sweat in 1485 sent alum prices soaring as panic drove villagers to dust every crease with sparkling powder. Our camera follows dusk settling over the village green. Washerwomen pack their linen shepherd's pen sheep, and the apprentice's mother swings her pomander one final time before hanging it above the hearth where tomorrow's clothes will smoke. The air inside the cottage now mingles well water's metallic edge. Juniper smoke and a hint of clove scents layered as deliberately as roof thatch. They cannot stop sweat from beading when summer hay must be cut, but they can dictate what lingers afterward, shaping memory itself. Travelers will recall this house by its faint perfume long after forgetting the family's names. With those layered aromas drifting upward into the chimney, we tilt our lens toward the darker smells lurking beyond the threshold. The privies, garderobes, and night pots whose management defined a town's livability. Point 9 will trace that hidden plumbing of odor, charting how medieval engineers guided waste away from wells and nostrils alike. For now, remember where clean water built a physical barrier against illness, fragrance erected a social moat. One drop of clove oil or pinch of alum at a time, allowing medieval folk to greet one another in close quarters without flinching, proof that sometimes the nose is as powerful a sentinel as the tongue that tastes the well. The last notes of clove and juniper from Point 8 still hang in the cottage air when our camera edges through the door and into the lane, following the scent until it collides quite literally with a different reality. The acrid tang rising from a wooden privy tucked behind the goat shed. For every fragrant pomander, there is a place like this where all odors eventually rendezvous. Here the art of living fresh encounters the engineering of moving filth, and that collision ushers us into Point 9, the medieval struggle to keep waste liquid solid and airborne from poisoning wells, homes, and reputations. A village privy is simple, a plank seat over a pit lined with wattled sticks or rough stone. Yet that pit represents remarkable calculation. Dig too shallow and rain or spring floods turn it into a fetid pond. Too deep and you risk boring down to the water table you drink from. Parish bylaws therefore dictated depths 6 feet in clay soils, 8 in sand, and distances from dwellings, wells, and neighbors' hedges. Violations triggered fines tallied in pence or more painfully public shaming on market day. Odor wasn't just a nuisance. It was proof of negligence that could brand a household as careless, even dangerous. Castles with their soaring walls and moats solved the conundrum differently: the garderobe. A narrow stone passage jutted over the exterior wall, ending in a vertical shaft through which waste plummeted into the moat or a dung heap far below. The same cold draft that chilled a knight's thighs also carried smells away from banquet halls. Engineers angled the chute outward so splash did not ricochet back, and masons lined upper edges with smooth slate to discourage rats from climbing. Some royal builders, notably at Edward I's Harlech, carved twin chutes to divide traffic lords to one side, servants to the other, symbolic plumbing of hierarchy into stone. Urban life demanded yet more ingenuity. Medieval London dug communal latrines perched over the Thames on stilts, their contents flushed away twice daily by tides. Paris ringed the Seine with maisons d'aisance, houses of ease, where small fees bought privacy and relative cleanliness. City records show bailiffs inspecting stools for leaks, so effluent didn't drip on bargemen below. In Lubeck and Bruges, landlocked canals served the same purpose, but magistrates mandated floating screens of reed bundles to corral solid matter before it drifted past quayside fish stalls. These screens were emptied by sludgemen, who bargained for offloading rights onto farmers' fields, turning urban offal into rural fertilizer long before modern tales of circular economies. Night pots bridged the gap between dark bedrooms and distant privies. Families kept ceramic chamber pots beneath beds glazed for the rich unglazed terracotta for the poor, and emptied them each dawn with ritual cries. In England, the warning "Gardes l'eau" morphed into the word "loo," a polite euphemism that still echoes down centuries. Households lacking yards tipped pots into street gutters funneled toward the town ditch. To stem the stench, councils required residents to curtain windows after dusk and pour a bucket of ash on the gutter at daybreak, the medieval equivalent of flushing. Offenders faced fines, or a stint scrubbing public paving stones, a punishment pungent enough to encourage compliance. Regulating waste also meant regulating industry. Tanneries with their foul lime pits and dyers, whose vats of urine-fermented cloth seeped into groundwater, were banished to town outskirts. Charters placed slaughterhouses downwind and downstream, then taxed them to fund repairs to conduits and bridges fouled by hoof and offal. Inspectors, often members of the same guilds they policed, carried sealing wax to shutter any operation caught sluicing refuse near wells. Their success was mixed, but the effort shows how freshly minted concepts of civic hygiene intertwined with commerce echoing the perfume guilds of our previous point. Managing smell required media beyond law. Folk wisdom recommended scattering sweet gale mugwort or marigold petals across privy floors to stupefy flies and soften the odor. Wealthier homes installed close stools, wooden chairs with padded seats, hiding ceramic pots below, lined with dried grass or straw. After use, servants sprinkled lye and lavender on the contents before carting them away. In monasteries, brothers rotated on reretorter duty, scrubbing the shared latrine trench weekly with buckets of salt and vinegar water, a penance that both humbled and protected the community. Night soil men occupied a curious social niche, reviled for their cargo, yet essential. They worked after curfew, lugging barrels through alleys, lit only by horn lanterns, voices muffled by vinegar-soaked scarves. Payment came in coins or rights to sell the collected waste to farmers who prized it as strong manure. Tax rolls from Cologne list entire families in the trade, their surnames literally. Sturkendrechter dirt carriers, or Scheisser, proof that identity and odor twined inseparably. Surprisingly, these workers often displayed robust health anecdotal evidence that constant exposure built immunity, though city doctors disagreed. Attributing outbreaks of summer ague to miasmas churned up by their carts. Speaking of miasmas, medieval medical theory held that plague and fever rode on corrupted airs. Thus, civic leaders saw smell control as disease control keeps stench moving away, and you steer sickness with it. During the Black Death, Milan famously walled up entire houses at the first sign of illness, but it also ordered new latrine pits dug outside the walls, where prevailing winds blew odors into uninhabited marsh. Venice sprayed quays with vinegar and burned aromatic wood day and night. These measures didn't halt plague, yet they reveal an instinct for environmental intervention remarkably close to modern public health zoning. Our apprentice's family participates in micro-scale versions of these policies. Each autumn, they shovel half-rotted privy waste into a cart and wheel it to the barley field, mixing it with straw and spreading it thin before snow falls. Come spring, last year's stench has mellowed into fertile loam, and the cycle begins anew. Inside the privy, they nail a fresh twist of sage above the seat scrape lime on the pit walls and whistle while they work because whistling, they believe, keeps evil spirits from lurking where shadows meet smell. After supper, father checks the well cover, mother pours a ladle of lye ashes down the kitchen slop bucket, and the children warm their bedchamber pot by embers so the cold won't crack it come night. These motions are as choreographed as the almond-laced perfume dabbed on wrists at church, illustrating a theme that threads every point so far. Medieval hygiene was rarely about one grand solution, but about hundreds of small, relentless acts that together tilted living conditions toward bearable. As the moon rises, our camera glides above rooftops. Below, narrow lanes form a vascular system, pulsing with unseen currents of water, air, and refuse. When towns grew too crowded, those currents clogged and epidemics surged. When councils enforced pit depths and sludge routes, life steadied. The tempo of shovel bucket and cart set a rhythm as crucial as bell towers measuring prayer. And from this vantage, the scented pomanders of Point 8 seem less frivolous and more heroic, a sensory countermeasure to a world perpetually teetering on the edge of foulness. Point 9, then, is the unsung plumbing of medieval survival garderobes, angled to deter rats' trenches that became fertilizer night soil men who walked invisible tightropes between disgust and necessity. Together, they formed the subterranean half of the hygiene story, every bit as ingenious as lace-worked silver pomanders. In our next chapter, we will surface again, this time into the bustling marketplace where all these hidden systems converge, shaping laws about when, where, and how people could gather without drowning in each other's odors. But tonight, as lamps dim and privy pits hush, remember the sweet smell of rosemary, clinging to a linen sleeve, owes its existence to the dark, disciplined roots that carried everything unsweet far, far away. The camera that just soared over privy pits and night soil carts now swoops down into the open square at the town's heart, a living laboratory where every odor rule and watercourse we examined in Point 9 collides with commerce. Cobblestones glisten from last night's rain, but the air already fizzes with clashing scents, freshly split pine. For market stalls, grated horseradish that stings the eye's tangy sheep dung from drovers threading their flocks toward the butcher row. If garderobes and cesspits were medieval plumbing, the marketplace is its pressure valve, and Point 10 follows the men and women who kept that valve from bursting. Just after dawn, two bellmen stride the square iron maces, clacking the ground. Their first duty is olfactory. They test the air for rancid, tallow-spoiled fish, or any whiff suggesting someone dumped slops after curfew. Should they find a stink, they mark the cobbles with chalk. By noon, the offender must scrub the patch with ash and vinegar, or risk a stint in the pillory public shame strong enough to keep most noses honest. These bellmen are disciples of the new assize of nuisance charters sweeping European cities by the late 1200s, legal blueprints that marry hygiene with trade. Where Point 9 showed privy depth measured in feet here, stall distances are measured in paces 8 from a fishmonger to a baker, 10 from tanned hides to the herb sellers, every pace calculated to stop odors leaping stall to stall. Watch how the butchers set up. They occupy the downwind edge nearest the drainage trench that angles toward the river. City statutes require them to spread straw beneath chopping blocks to soak blood before it can congeal between the stones. At midday, a warden will judge that straw too wet, and it must be shoveled into a wagon marked only for blood waste, destined for farms beyond the walls. The wagon's driver is kin to the night soil men, despised yet paid on time, because rotting offal is fertilizer gold. Across the trench stand, fishmongers under canvas awnings dyed blue. A color guild lore claims keeps flies at bay. Their fish rest on beds of wet rushes, refreshed hourly with buckets from the conduit 2 streets over. Fountain keepers monitor that flow, fining any merchant who ladles more than his quota and leaves neighbors dry. Amid this choreography moves the beer guard, a guild official, whose badge and enamel shield topped by a carved nose signals authority to smell on behalf of the city. She pauses at a barrel of pickled herring sniffs, then thrusts a brass rod deep into the brine and draws out a sample. If the fish eyes look cloudy or the brine too murky, she can confiscate the lot and dump it into carts bound for the rendering yard, where failed food becomes lamp oil. The merchant protests, but townsfolk applaud. Rancid fish was a killer last summer. Here civic health and economic reputation align. A market known for sour odors loses buyers faster than poor harvests. On the square's sunny side stand spice hawkers and perfumers, heirs to the pomander trade of Point 8. They spritz rosewater into the breeze, not merely to entice customers, but to wage a sensory duel against the butcher's iron tang. City bylaws give them that corner precisely for its prevailing wind. Urban planning turns air currents into invisible barricades, an early attempt at what we'd call zoning. One perfumer even pays street urchins to wave palm fans, pushing fragrance toward the cloth stalls where wealthy patrons linger. In doing so, he expands the protective moat of scent we discussed earlier, from the personal scale of pomanders to the civic scale of whole streets. Street cleaners, scavengers in the charter roll trail. This bustle like a pit crew. Armed with wooden scrapers and woven rush baskets, they scour gutters twice daily. First after the breakfast rush, and again when market closes. Their scrapings bones wilted greens, straw-broken pots. Feed piggeries beyond the walls. Fines finance their wages. A single dropped offal scrap costs the butcher 4 pence. A tipped stew pot costs the alewife her week's seat fee. Enforcement may seem draconian, but the link between filth and fever is etched in local memory. Last season's bloody flux traced right back to a clogged drain behind the cheese stalls. Water, which we followed so closely in Point 7, underpins every regulation. Conduit masters hold keys to padlocked spigots. Fountain hours stagger by guild, so dyers filling vats don't deprive bakers proofing dough. On feast days, extra barrels arrive from suburb springs paid for by a tax levied on out-of-town vendors. A shortfall triggers the dreaded dry bell at City Hall. Commerce halts, stalls shutter, and a procession carries relics through the streets, praying for rain, or at least fewer throats to parch. Faith and public works march shoulder to shoulder, 2 levers on the same pump. Our apprentice, now old enough to sell surplus herb bundles, navigates this maze with practiced ease. She sprinkles the last of yesterday's alum powder beneath her stall to neutralize the faint sheep smell wafting from across the lane. She knows inspectors will check not only her weights and measures, but also her corner's aroma. Too much stench, and they'll claim she's attracting vermin. When a customer bargains hard, she sweetens the deal by adding a sprig of wormwood keeps flies and bad humors away. She winks, echoing the marketplace's unwritten law. Smell is currency. Noon brings a pause of sorts. Bellmen strike the hour. Hawkers kneel in the dust for Angelus. Scavengers wheel away morning straw. A quick sweep of rosewater revives weary noses before trade resumes. It's a fragile equilibrium, one burst wineskin, one thunderstorm backing up the drain, and odor will flood the square faster than prices can drop. Yet for now, the system holds because every participant from barrow boy to beer guard performs a small, relentless ritual. Learned over. Generations sweep. Sprinkle shovel. Sniff. Market statutes ripple outward to shape private life. Craftsmen living above their shops must whitewash walls each spring to mask forge smoke. Innkeepers facing the square cannot skin eels indoors after vespers, lest travelers wake to what charters coyly call unwholesome savor. Even weddings bow to olfaction. A newlywed couple receives a perfumed token from the perfumer's guild part blessing part reminder to keep their shared chamber pot covered and their laundry timely. Thus, civic scent policy seeps behind every door. As twilight gilds the timber gables, a final troop arrives. Torchbearers scattering resinous powder that crackles and smolders, masking the day's final dumpings. Stalls fold shut. Gutters receive one last dousing of ash. And the square exhales a composite breath part, pine part, blood part, frankincense. The camera drifts upward again, past attic windows, where families hang rush torches, scented with thyme integrating public order into private rhythm. We began this episode among cesspits. We end amid spices, proving that medieval sanitation was never just beneath the streets, but threaded through trade taste and the rule of law. Point 10, then, is the symphony of rules and rituals that kept medieval markets livable straw beneath cleavers' chalk. For stink fines, for spills, and perfume on the breeze. Together, they form the civic counterpart to the household strategies we explored earlier, showing how entire towns joined forces to keep rot at arm's length. In our next chapter, we'll slip beyond the square to the pilgrim roads where travelers carried these hard-won habits, good and bad, across borders, sowing new customs, wherever they paused for bread and a breath of hopefully sweet air. The camera drifts away from the shuttered market square of Point 10, following a ribbon of rutted dirt that snakes beyond the town gate. Just outside the walls, stone shrines stud the verge like breadcrumbs, each marking a point where travelers pause to cross themselves, adjust burdens, and slip from civic order into the improvisational world of the open road. Point 11 begins here, tracing how the hard-won hygiene habits of marketplace and hearth traveled sometimes intact, sometimes distorted along the pilgrim routes that laced medieval Europe together. Dawn finds a modest procession assembling beneath a wayside oak. 3 wool-cloaked merchants, 2 Franciscan friars, a widow bound for Compostela, and our by-now familiar herb-selling apprentice hired to carry a basket of alum and sage farther than she has ever gone. The friars greet each newcomer with a sniff and a smile, as if taking informal inventory of personal odors. The marketplace statutes still echo in their noses. Before setting off, they tap a small barrel, lashed to a mule Florentine vinegar, diluted just enough for drinking, and dole out thin leather flasks. Water beyond the town is guesswork. Acidifying it is insurance. In that simple gesture, the conduit rules of the city square morph into a portable ritual. The road quickly teaches new constraints. Privies disappear, replaced by hedgerows and shallow catholes dug a prudent distance from streams. Pilgrims learn to reckon wind direction before squatting echoing the garderobe engineers of castles. Ash for covering waste is scarce, so travelers rely on dry soil and a scattering of pine needles to tamp both sight and smell. The widow carries a tiny pouch of alum powder. After using the roadside, she dusts a pinch onto her linen shift's hem, where it brushed the ground, a habit picked up from city laundresses who treated stains before they set. Thus, every halt becomes a pop-up hygiene station, marrying civic lessons to frontier necessity. Mealtimes reveal a different choreography. Mid-morning, the group rests at a mill stream, where water tumbles foamy and cold. The merchants unpack salted pork wrapped in sage-lined cloths that kept flies away in the market. They rinse wooden cups upstream from where they wash hands, market fines for cross-contamination echoing in memory, then pass the vinegar barrel for a final swirl that doubles as disinfectant and palate cleanser. The apprentice contributes a pinch of dried mint to each cup, the same herb she once sold to spice hawkers, turning utilitarian rinse into modest refreshment. Even here in mud-splattered boots, scent remains social currency. The travelers chat more easily when breath smells of mint instead of pork rind. Evening brings them to a pilgrim hospice outside a walled abbey. These roadside shelters, sponsored by guilds or monarchs, are sanitation compromise zones bridging town and wilderness. Hospitalers greet arrivals with warm cider and direct them to a timber washhouse where rainwater cisterns feed a row of wooden basins. A sign lists rules: no full-body bathing after sunset to deter pneumonia soap. Only on laundry rails, not in basins, to keep drains. Clear linen shifts changed before entering the dormitory lice patrol. Each edict echoes market ordinances, yet adapts to throughput. 100 strangers may share these basins tonight, so turnover speed matters as much as cleanliness. Our apprentice and the widow claim a basin together. They share one pea-sized lump of soft Castile soap lather linen cloths and dry wash the way Point 3 described, targeting odor ports never soaking long enough for chill. A hospitaler patrols with a lantern sniffing water for rancid fat. Soap-rich suds must be dumped outside, where a gravel trench filters grease away from the well. Waste management lessons from cesspits reappear scaled down to a roadside trench. The friars, meanwhile, join a queue for deloosing a steward, passes hot iron combs through their tonsures, singeing stray knits with faint crackles that mingle with psalm chant. Hair care from Point 5, weaponized against dormitory epidemics. After supper, barley pottage and hard cheese, the hospice chapel hosts health vespers. A monk recites a litany of Saint Roch against plague, then offers practical counsel: boil river water, sleep feet to fire for warmth, and carry rosemary sprigs to sniff when the air turns foul. He sprinkles attendees with rosewater scented by local perfumers, the same guild that once scented marketplace aisles. Spiritual and sensory prophylaxis blur. Pilgrims leave chapel smelling faintly of petals, convinced they wear invisible armor. Night tests the system. In the women's dormitory, straw mattresses packed wall-to-wall compress under tossing bodies. Windows shutter tight against cold also trap breath and sweat. The apprentice slips her pomander the walnut ball from Point 8 into the rafters above her head. Clove and myrrh drift downward, cutting through a stew of human scent and damp wool. Nearby, the widow sprinkles dried wormwood on her bedding. Legend says it repels fleas. Whether or not it works, the odor signals active self-care, reassuring bunkmates. Collective etiquette emerges. Coughs turned into blankets, chamber pots kept lidded until dawn, a shared tolerance for unavoidable smells, so long as each traveler shows visible effort to mitigate them. Come morning, the hospice staff conduct nose inspection. They pace dormitories, inhaling at random. Excessive stench earns pilgrims a chore, scrubbing basins, or fetching firewood before they may depart. Far from punitive, the rule reinforces communal ownership of air quality, a portable version of the chalk marks bellmen left in the town square. When the merchants gripe that the butchers back home never faced such humiliation, the steward smiles. On the road, we are all butchers if we neglect our stink. Beyond the hospice, the landscape changes again. Forested ridges, marshy lowlands, certain stretches where brigand rumors keep pilgrims clustered. Different environments spark different hygiene hacks. In pine groves, travelers collect resinous bark to burn at camp for its insect-repelling smoke. In marshes, they smear boots with tallow laced with alum to ward off leeches, and they hope marsh miasmas. At ferry crossings, boatmen prohibit latrine use, onboard pointing. Instead, to reed beds upstream, where currents run strong. Each microeconomy invents rules mirroring the logic of distant markets, but tuned to local vulnerabilities. Word of new tricks spreads fast along the road. From a Lombard spice carrier, they learn that some Florentine inns now issue tiny wax pellets infused with camphor chewed nightly They freshen breath and ease chest vapors. The merchants trade a length of Flemish linen for a handful, eager to test the claim. Knowledge becomes as fungible as coin. A good hygiene tip can buy supper or safe passage. Thus, the road functions as Europe's circulatory system, pumping regional hygiene cultures into fresh territories. Inevitably, lapses occur. One rainy afternoon, a friar relieves himself too near the stream feeding their canteens. The widow scolds him with language fit for a fishmonger. The apprentice, recalling well-worn lectures, insists they boil water before refilling flasks. The delay costs daylight, but that evening no one vomits, and the friar spends penance hours scrubbing pots, a living footnote to the assize charters of home. Error produces immediate corrective ritual reinforcing group norms, far from courts and fines. Weeks later, the procession reaches a bustling shrine town. Street hawkers sell scallop shell badges. Taverns trumpet clean sheets nightly. Behind the boast lies a frantic laundry washerwomen boil linens in vats laced with lye and spruce needles, hanging them over smoke bays to dry by candlelight. Pilgrims pay willingly for a straw tick that smells of pine and soap, proof that the market's scent economy trails them even to sacred thresholds. Our camera ascends one final time, tracing the pilgrims' footprints overlapping countless others, each carrying fragments of civic sanitation into the wild and back again. Point 11 shows that medieval hygiene was not static architecture, but a migratory toolkit: soap shards, alum pinches, vinegar drafts, and perfumed tokens reforged at every milepost. The road spread best practices, yet also tested them, exposing weaknesses that towns then codified into stricter bylaws. In the next chapter, we'll turn to those returning pilgrims whose tales of distant baths and perfumed smokehouses would spark homefront innovation, nudging Europe toward the first faint glimmers of Renaissance public health. Until then, remember the traveler's pack carried more than bread and relics. It ferried the scent of one town's fresh ideas to the next, ensuring that hygiene like faith never stayed quarantined behind city walls. The clatter of the pilgrim road fades, and our camera glides into a candlelit scriptorium where returning travelers unroll maps and trade rumors over cups of watered wine. Their stories of distant bathhouses and ingenious roadside hospices ignite an older curiosity in the friar scholar who hosts them. He pushes aside the scallop shells of Compostela and unfurls a parchment annotated with even older marvel cities that solved the problem of water waste and odor millennia before Europe's muddy market squares. Point 12 pulls that parchment into focus, linking the portable hygiene kit of Point 11 to the grand, deliberate sanitation systems of the ancient world. First stop, the Indus Valley Sea. 2600 BCE. Imagine a hot, dust-laden wind sweeping across an orderly grid of baked brick streets in Mohenjo-Daro. The town plan looks eerily modern. Long straight avenues intersect at right angles, forming residential blocks no farther than 50 paces from a public well. Each house, whether modest two-room cottage or merchant's mini palace, boasts its own bathing platform made of watertight gypsum plaster. Wastewater slips through a perforated jar, disappears into a terracotta pipe, and joins a brick-lined storm drain that runs beneath the street before emptying beyond the city wall. No chamber pots hurled from windows, no flies clustering round cesspits, just gravity and masonry, doing on a civic scale what our pilgrim widow's pinch of alum did for her roadside privy. Travel northwest, and the scholar's quill points to Harappa. There, the same grid logic reigns, but planners added a clever vertical twist. Multi-story dwellings with upstairs latrines that drop into enclosed chutes, tiny ancestors of the castle garderobes from Point 9. The chute angle brick bonding and placement all conform to a standard that builders repeated across the city, proof of central oversight. Archaeologists will one day measure bricks and discover a uniform ratio, x2x4, embedded like a signature in every wall. Where medieval masons stamped family crests on soap or perfumers marked market stalls with rosewater indus, engineers stamped reliability into brick itself. Still farther south, near the drying salt flats of Gujarat, lies Lothal, a port town whose dockyard channels can rise or fall with the tides of the Sabarmati River. Here hygiene meets commerce head-on. Cargo handlers rinse fishy amphorae in a freshwater basin before loading cotton and beadwork for distant Bahrain. The runoff sluices through stone gratings into a separate sewer, so harbor water stays clear, echoing the market square zoning that placed butchers downwind of bakers in Point 10. Lothal's planners understood that trade dies if stench warns buyers away before coin changes hands. Pull back for a bird's-eye view. Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Lothal look like siblings. Rectilinear, evenly spaced, punctuated by public baths and assembly halls. Their subterranean arteries mirror their streets, a twin grid of covered drains that confine refuse, conquer standing water, and silence the mosquitoes that today still plague the Pilgrim Road. What our medieval travelers achieve with boiled vinegar-scented cloths and finds, these Bronze Age engineers embedded in fired clay 4,000 years earlier. Why does this matter to Europe's late Middle Ages? Because ideas once launched tend to travel as relentlessly as pilgrims. Greek historians carried tales of well-drained eastern cities back to the Hellenistic world. Roman architects borrowed covered drain techniques for provincial outposts. Islamic scholars preserved and expanded the hydraulic math. By the time our Franciscan friars swap stories in that scriptorium, fragments of Indus ingenuity secondhand, mythologized but persistent, have already threaded into Arabic treatises on Connaught's Spanish irrigation laws and eventually Italian Renaissance debates on rational street grids. The Indus cities themselves may lie forgotten beneath silt, yet their logic leaks forward like groundwater, ready for the next civilization to tap. Consider how each Indus planning principle dovetails with habits our road-weary pilgrims now carry home. Short distance to clean water. The Indus ratio, no house more than a stone's throw from a well, parallels the friars' insistence on vinegar flasks and the market conduit quotas. Both doctrines make hydration convenient and therefore safer. Dedicated drainage for waste. Ancient brick sewers anticipate the medieval garderobe shafts and the straw-lined butcher stalls channeling blood to licensed carts. Separation is salvation. Standardized materials and dimensions. Baked brick modules echo the marketplace's regulated stall spacing and the hospice's soap usage rules. Uniformity enforces predictability. Predictability breeds public trust. Zoning by function. Lothal's commercial docks sit downstream of residential wells, just as medieval bylaws push tanners outside town limits. Trade thrives only when noses and stomachs permit. These echoes aren't coincidence. They are convergent answers to universal pressures. Too many bodies, too little tolerance for the smell of decay. Too high a cost when disease strikes. Our apprentice, hearing the scholar animate brick diagrams with charcoal on vellum, recognizes the spirit of her own alum pouch. In those ancient drains, both are small practical acts that scale up to public health when multiplied by thousands of hands. There is irony, too. Medieval Europe often framed its hygiene struggles as a break from a pristine Roman past. We have lost the baths of Caracalla. We must make do. Yet beyond Rome stood even older models, far more egalitarian in water access than many medieval capitals would manage until the 19th century. The scholar's parchment becomes a mirror, showing pilgrims that what they call innovation vinegar water flasks. Straw under butcher blocks, is on a longer timeline rediscovery. As evening candles gutter low, the friars pack the parchment away, but its implications linger. One vows to petition his order for funds to repair a monastery's crumbling culvert. Another wonders if the hospice trench could be widened into a true covered drain. The merchant's eyes alight calculate profits in selling standardized clay pipes instead of ad hoc wooden troughs. Ideas have changed hands as surely as relic badges at a shrine stall. Our camera pulls back through the scriptorium's lattice window, catches a last glimpse of that grid sketched in lamp black, and glides westward toward Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica. Other ancient cradles where city planners aligned streets with stars and channeled stormwater like music. Point 12, then, is the widening of the medieval horizon, a reminder that sanitation's lineage stretches far beyond Europe's pilgrim roads, back to civilizations that baked cleanliness into the very bricks beneath their feet. In the next chapter, we will follow that widening gaze to Babylon and Teotihuacan, where monumental avenues and ritual gateways imposed order on crowds the size of whole kingdoms, a scale that will challenge everything our apprentice thinks she knows about zoning stench and the politics of clean streets. For now, keep the image of Mohenjo-Daro's quiet covered drain beside the pilgrim's leather flask. Both whisper the same lesson across 3,000 years. Water must move, waste must vanish, and a city that ignores those truths will crumble long before its bricks do. The inky grid of Mohenjo-Daro still lingers in your mind when the friar scholar's candle sputters back to life and illuminates new markings on his parchment. Two names written in a bolder, more theatrical script: Babylon and Teotihuacan. If the Indus cities of Point 12 taught Europe's pilgrims that sanitation could be woven quietly into every house and drain these twin giants, now show them that clean infrastructure can also become a stage on which empires declare their power. What unfolds next is a tale of monumental avenues, sacred geometry, and hydraulic theater ideas that will echo across Renaissance piazzas and, centuries later, the boulevards of Haussmann's Paris. Yet first inspire the very pilgrims who murmur around this parchment tonight. Picture Babylon in the 6th century BCE, just after dawn, when the double walls are still cool to the touch, and the Euphrates glimmers like a bronze blade cleaving the city in two. The Ishtar Gate glazed in lapis blues and lion reliefs funnels merchants and supplicants into a processional way, paved with limestone slabs so tight-fitting that no dung or mud can wedge between them. Along both verges, narrow runnels carry wastewater southward. Engineers graded each slab by hand, so a constant film of river overflow washes the flagstones. The street becomes a self-cleaning red carpet, its shine reinforcing the majesty of Nebuchadnezzar's palaces. Our European merchants who once sprinkled ash under butcher blocks would gape at the audacity. Here the king uses a whole river as mop and perfume combined. Yet Babylon's sanitation genius hides underground. Beneath the main avenue, vaulted storm drains as tall as a man form a shadow city. Access shafts disguised as storeroom floors allow night cruise slaves mostly to rake silt, clear debris, and if tablets are to be believed, sweep away the occasional crocodile that drifts in on floodwater. These drains empty into reed-lined settling ponds beyond the walls, where sludge fertilizes date groves. It is night soil collection on an imperial scale, but the principle matches the wagon routes of Point 9. Keep odor and illness outside living quarters, turn filth into fuel for the next harvest. Now glide east across oceans of time and geography to the high Mexican plateau circa 250 CE, where Teotihuacan fans out beneath a cerulean sky. From the air, it looks like an enormous circuit board. The Avenue of the Dead cuts north-south for more than 2 miles, flanked by tiered apartment compounds, oriented 1512 degrees east of true north, a deliberate tilt so that on certain days, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the pyramids bathing the avenue in golden light. This skew also channels prevailing winds, creating a gentle draft that clears cooking smoke and incense from courtyards. Airflow as urban design, an echo of the perfumer's corner in Point 10, but scaled up to serve a city of perhaps 100,000 souls. Teotihuacan's builders, lacking a perennial river, mastered the art of capturing the rainy season. Beneath each apartment block, a cistern catches runoff, filtered through layers of charcoal and crushed volcanic rock, a natural purifier rivaling any vinegar flask. Wastewater from stone bath chambers drains into these same filters, then seeps into garden plots where maize amaranth and medicinal herbs grow in raised beds. The entire metropolis becomes a circulatory system. Sky to cistern, to bath, to field, to granary. Medieval monks debating whether to widen a culvert would find in these cisterns a precedent both humbling and inspiring. Ritual politics and sanitation entwine wherever you look. Babylon's priests pour aromatic oils onto temple steps. The runoff mingles with rinse water and drifts down gutters, scenting whole boulevards with frankincense. Teotihuacan's elite sponsor feasts at plaza kitchens equipped with basalt drains that whisk pigweed stems and chili seeds into compost trenches. Diners leave with clean sandals and reverence for hosts who keep plazas spotless. In both cities, the cleanliness of public space becomes propaganda. If the gods tolerate no filth in their precincts, the king or the noble lineage must be in divine favor. Our parchment's audience, pilgrims, friars, and merchants feel the persuasive power of scale. They have seen straw-soaked butcher stalls and hospice trenches. Now they imagine a thoroughfare wide enough for 6 chariots washed by a diverted river, or a pyramid plaza swept clear by engineered breezes. Ambition swells. The young herb seller envisions her hometown's cramped lanes reborn as straight guttered streets lined with cisterns. The friars recall biblical Jerusalem and wonder whether Solomon's engineers matched Babylon's drains. Ideas germinate faster than basil in midsummer, yet the parchment also bears cautionary glosses notes the scholar scrawled when news reached him of abandoned bricks and silent plazas. Babylon's canals silted when successive kings neglected dredging to fund wars. Malaria crept back into date groves once ponds stagnated. Teotihuacan's cistern networks fractured after volcanic eruptions and internal strife. The Avenue of the Dead fell quiet, its engineered breezes rustling dead leaves instead of incense smoke. Infrastructure like linen or soap must be tended daily. Majesty cannot outrun entropy. The apprentices nod, reminded of market bellmen chalking odor marks at dawn. Small routines fortify grand designs. The scholar tilts his candle again, and Europe re-enters the picture. He traces how Roman military engineers studied Babylonian irrigation texts preserved on clay tablets, then carried those principles to frontier camps along the Rhine. He recounts Andalusian caliphs translating Persian Qanat manuals, their insights seeping north through the Pyrenees into Catalan drainage law, the very law that dictates how far butchers must stand from bakers. This lineage, he says, is a river underground. You cannot always see its flow, but every clean cup of water in a crowded city owes a trickle to it. Midnight approaches. The pilgrims gather their packs, now heavier with visions of ceremonial avenues and subterranean sewers. Before they leave, the scholar hands each merchant a small clay cylinder, his replica of a Babylonian drain tile, and gifts the friars a charcoal sketch of Teotihuacan's cistern layers. Tools for the imagination, he calls them. Show your magistrates what the ancients already knew. Our camera recedes through the scriptorium arch, slips into moonlit streets where rain gutters gleam and tilts toward the horizon, where Renaissance city-states will soon sprout. There humanists will resurrect. Vitruvius artists will paint ideal cities in mathematical perspective, and engineers will debate whether to grid new suburbs or follow medieval cowpaths. Point 13 closes on this anticipation. The knowledge gleaned from Babylon's glory and Teotihuacan's order will inspire planners to fuse spectacle with sanitation, aiming for boulevards that awe the eye and spare the nose. In the next chapter, we will witness one such synthesis. Hadrian's travels across the Roman world, his wall and his pantheon, all projects that pivot Rome from conquest to consolidation. For now, tuck away the clay drain tile beside the pilgrim's pomander and the widow's alum pouch. Each object, humble or grand, speaks the same refrain across continents and centuries. The health of a city depends on the roots we carve for water, wind, and waste, and on the stories we tell to keep those roots clear. Dawn spills over the red-tiled roofs of a second-century Roman port, and our camera tilts southward along a marble road where plumed couriers gallop beneath milestones stamped IMPK's Hadrian's AVG. Rome is no longer racing outward in conquest. It is stitching itself together, and the tailor is Hadrian, trailed by engineers, surveyors, and scribes who tally every leak in an aqueduct and every whiff from a clogged latrine. Point 14 picks up the baton from Babylon's hydraulic theater and Teotihuacan's wind-sculpted avenues. Point 13 to show how one emperor fused spectacle with maintenance, turning sanitation and monumental architecture into tools of imperial consolidation. Hadrian begins his reign by pulling legions out of Mesopotamia, a retreat some senators call cowardice. Yet he immediately spends the saved silver on infrastructure audits that span a continent. He rides with a portable drafting desk, strapped to a mule, sketching repairs for Tarraco's aqueduct arches, ordering new sluice gates for the cisterns at Athens, and inspecting bathhouse furnaces in provincial capitals most emperors only knew from tribute lists. Where Trajan celebrated victories with columns, Hadrian commissions facility logbooks, pragmatic parchments noting how many slaves sweep sewers, how many tiles crack above hippocausts, how much lime is left for deodorizing public latrines. His travels read like a Hygiene grand tour: Tarragona's water tower first, then Ephesus's marble-seated public latrine, where rain channels undercut stink, then Antioch's colonnaded street, whose central gutter is flush-washed each dawn by diverted Orontes water. Everywhere civic pride and plumbing are soldered together. Camera shift north, the raw edge of Britannia, 122 CE. Hadrian's wall rises course by course, 73 miles of limestone, stitched with mile castles that double as customs booths and, crucially, as sanitation checkpoints. Each fortlet includes a bathhouse with underfloor heat to stave off damp and lice, and a latrine angled so prevailing westerlies yank smell east toward uninhabited moor. The wall's ditch is intentionally V-shaped, so winter floods scour it clean. Soldiers grumble about stone cutting, but they enjoy hot water, a rarity on Rome's fringes, and they mail letters praising sweepers who clear ordure daily by order of the emperor. Thus, frontier propaganda matches inner empire policy. The same authority that curbs expansion can still deliver warm baths and odor-free barracks. Swing east to Judea, 132 CE. The Bar Kokhba revolt erupts, and Hadrian answers brutally, razing villages, banning circumcision, and renaming Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina. Amid the ashes, he drafts a new street grid, crowned by a Cardo Maximus with covered drains and regular public fountains. His critics call it desecration. His engineers call it standardization. The safest route to water security in a city scarred by siege. Even oppression marches under the banner of hygiene. Rebels hiding in caves are flushed with smoke, as choking as the incense once burned for Teotihuacan's gods. Maintaining order and maintaining cleanliness share tactics. Direct the air, control the flow, leave nothing stagnant. Back in Rome, Hadrian's most audacious consolidation project rises on the ashes of Agrippa's temple, the Pantheon we know today. Step inside beneath the yawning oculus and notice that the floor is a slight convex dish. Rainfall gliding through the eye of the dome rushes along hidden channels to cisterns that cool summer baths nearby. The building is both celestial calendar and rain barrel, a cosmic drainpipe clad in porphyry. Marble revetments glisten because attendants wipe them with citrus oil, then buff with soft pumice, just as pickled fish barrels were sniff-tested in Point 10's marketplace. Visitors leave marveling not only at the coffered dome, but at how their sandals stay dry, despite open sky overhead. Spectacle braided seamlessly with functional drainage. Hadrian's urbanism seeps beyond Italy via Hadrianic codes, edicts that instruct magistrates from Lepsis Magna to Londinium on street widths, latrine placement, and monthly sewer inspections. One surviving tablet from Bostra in Arabia orders 2 parts graveled road for every 1 part drain, ensuring sludge never buries paving stones. Another from Gaul defines a fine for bakers whose dough water clogs gutters, echoing our earlier butcher straw rule. Scholars later call these rules mundane. Provincial bricklayers call them the emperor's face because every time they lay pipe or revet a drain, they invoke imperial authority as tangibly as a statue. Yet, Hadrian is also a patron of private cleanliness. He expands the Alimenta welfare program to include soap rations for orphanages, citing health of the young as the wealth of the realm. He funds new natatio pools so women can swim without mingling in men's baths, quelling moralists while promoting hygiene. When his beloved Antinous drowns in the Nile in 130 CE, Hadrian founds Antinopolis, mapping its streets in a grid reminiscent of Indus Valley order, each insula no farther than a 2-minute walk from a public fountain or latrine. Grief translates into urban planning water and waste as votive offerings to a deified companion. Our pilgrim merchants now home parse news of these projects with mercantile eyes. They read that marble chips left over from Pantheon reconstruction sell cheap as odor-absorbing aggregate for tavern floors. They ship crates north. They hear of portable aqueductus kits, pre-cut terracotta flumes stamped with imperial marks available in Ostia. They finance a barge to haul them up the Rhone. Thus, Hadrian's focus on consolidation seeds a secondary economy in hygiene technology, spreading Roman plumbing not by conquest, but by catalog order. Critics still label him contradiction. He slaughtered Judean rebels, yet let Athenians vote themselves new drains. He walled Britannia, but removed the punitive customs booths on the Danube to hasten grain shipments, fresh bread molds slower than slow grain. His own court joked that he scribbled on marble, so often did he redline architects' blueprints. But the contradictions resolve when you frame them as single obsession balance. Where earlier emperors chased land, Hadrian chased equilibrium between spectacle and function cost, and cleanliness center and periphery. As twilight curls around the Colosseum's arches, our camera pans across the Tiber to Hadrian's mausoleum. Later, the Castel Sant'Angelo. Its ring drains still glug beneath travertine slabs, channeling stormwater into marshes once feared for malaria. Pilgrims watch torchlight flicker on the stone and grasp the final lesson monuments survive, not only because they awe, but because they shed water and repel rot. A wall that leaks a palace, that stinks a forum, that floods these die as surely as empires. Point 14 closes with that insight. Hadrian bequeaths to medieval Europe a blueprint for marrying glory to maintenance colossal domes that also double as cistern covers, frontier walls that double as sanitary cordons. city grids that inherit Indus precision, yet remain adaptable under Roman law. His reign does not invent sanitation, but it institutionalizes it, making clean streets and steady water as visible a symbol of power as eagles on a standard. In our next and final chapter, we will watch how later rulers codify commerce itself around this principle, writing market laws that standardize weights, scents, and drainage just as strictly as distance and coinage. For now, hold three images together. The Babylonian clay drain tile, Teotihuacan's rain-catching courtyard, and Hadrian's Pantheon floor, slick after a cloudburst, yet perfectly dry underfoot. Across centuries and continents, they chant the same refrain: civilization endures where water waste and wonder run in disciplined channels. Night's cool hush still clings to Hadrian's Pantheon floor rainwater, gliding noiselessly toward hidden drains when our camera tilts north and forward in time. A low-roofed counting house in 9th century Lyon flickers into view, its walls lined with cedar coffers that smell faintly of myrrh soap. The very bricks of cleanliness born in earlier chapters. Cloaked clerks cluster around an abacus, but what they truly measure tonight is trust. Every sack of barley bolt, of dyed wool, or flask of rosewater they record must match a weight. A scent, a purity that buyers miles away will accept without a second sniff. Point 15 begins here, linking Hadrian's imperial maintenance to the medieval codification of commerce itself, the moment when hygiene, once enforced by emperors and bellmen, migrates onto parchment as tables of units. Guild seals and market ordinances that make trade possible across continents. Listen to the scrape of a quill as the chief clerk tallies 1 libra of Castile soap stamped with the dolphin mark. Odor mild almond, fault none. That dolphin stamp echoes Hadrianic brick codes, but also whispers back to Hammurabi's cuneiform standards for silver weights. In earlier points, we watched Babylonians glaze streets with river wash, Venetians position perfumers upwind, and Romans slope bath floors for perfect drainage. Now, those design instincts harden into rules that travel faster than armies. A Genoese merchant arriving tomorrow will expect Lyon's Libra to match the pound he used in Tunis. If it does, he'll pay instantly, confident the soap will lather just as thick in Mediterranean saltwater as in Rhonish well water. Outside, dawn bells summon vendors to the Place du Change. First to arrive are the waymasters, gray-robed arbiters, who lug brass scales calibrated weekly against 2 master stones chained inside the cathedral treasury. Without standardized mass, all earlier hygiene victories collapse too. Light alum cakes breed stink. Watered vinegar fails to kill microbes. Soap diluted with lard leaves, grease on linen. The scales, therefore, are public health devices as vital as drains. Every trader who sets up a stall must first watch a weighmaster hang his sample goods check that no lead slugs hide in the cask, no cloves are bulked with cassia bark. Failure means confiscation, and worst of all, a fine earmarked, not for royal coffers, but for street washing and gutter scraping. Clean trade literally pays for clean streets. Hadrian once toured provinces red-inking bathhouse blueprints. Frankish kings now issue capitularies that do the same with numbers. Let all bread for sale weigh so many solidi, or be forfeit to the poor. Beneath those dry lines runs a sanitary undercurrent. Underweight loaves encourage adulteration with chaff or worse mildewed flour that sickens children. The bread scale on the stall thus becomes a sibling to the aqueduct sluice gate, both devices that ration resources and ward off disease. Our camera glides to a dyer's booth where bolts of crimson wool steam above simmering madder vats. A guild inspector pinches a sample, lifts it to his nose. The dye must smell of alum and vinegar, no trace of urine strong enough to gag passers-by. If odor offends the bolt, earns a chalk slash and an overnight soak in alder wood barrels set outside town walls. Guild statutes require this airing just as strictly as they dictate color fastness. They echo Babylonian priests perfuming temple drains and Teotihuacan nobles venting plaza smoke. Where earlier cultures used ritual to scent space, medieval Europe welds fragrance control into trade policy. Profit now depends on not stinking. Pan east to the spice loggias of Venice, 1172 CE. The Great Council decrees that every clove sack landed at the Riva must bear a lead-balla stamped with lion wings and a date. Dock scribes clip the balla, sniff the sack, and jot a note aroma, vivid no mold. Should a moldy batch slip through its trader covers the cost of scrubbing foul timbers and lime-washing pier stones. Maritime hygiene merges with merchant risk. Insurers in Pisa soon offer lower premiums to captains who prove their pepper holds the Republic's seal of purity. Thus, Hadrian's fusion of glory and maintenance becomes a bond underwriter's formula. Back in Lyon, the day advances and the square fills with hum. A brewer rolls in barrels of small beer, each cork embossed with an abbey's cross. The cross certifies that the monks boiled the mash long enough to kill the river's amoeba. Pilgrims fresh from Point 11's roadside hospices recognize the mark and buy around trusting the brothers' reputation not just for salvation, but sterilization. Certification transforms hard-learned hygiene hacks into instantly legible brands, shrinking the need for each customer to perform their own vinegar boil. Commerce, in short, becomes communal memory. Every stamp scale and scent test encodes centuries of trial and error, so future buyers need only glance. Guild charters also tackle noise and, by extension, smell. Smiths must quench red-hot iron in troughs a street away from produce stalls to prevent the hiss of steam and whiff of burnt tallow from spoiling cheese sales. Tanners receive curfew. Bell's hides may stew in lime pits only from dusk till matins, when cool air traps odor close to the riverbank. Violators forfeit a week's rent toward the sweeping of gore and scrubbing of benches, reinvesting nuisance fines into sanitation labor. The loop mirrors point 10's straw for blood policy, but is written now in legal Latin rather than chalk. Trade fairs push standardization beyond city walls. At Champagne's annual gathering, Milanese soap boilers swap dolphin-stamped bars for English wool sealed with a crowned rose. Each seal certifies not only origin, but compliance with hometown hygiene regulations. A false mark risks excommunication from the fair, a penalty merchants fear more than royal armies. The clerk from our opening scene carries a leather booklet listing every recognized emblem each entry sniffed, weighed, and annotated. His nose and his ledger keep Lyon credible in a roaring network that stretches from Flanders to Acre. Daily cleanup echoes Hadrian's logbooks. As twilight falls, scavengers in hooded smocks sweep dung and spent rushes into carts emblazoned with the city arms. They dump loads at licensed middens, whose walls stand precisely 40 ells from the nearest well measurements lifted verbatim from a Carolingian capitulary itself, a descendant of Roman foot rules. A bailiff inspects with an iron yardstick. If the midden has encroached so much as a finger's breadth, fines fund an extra conduit flush at dawn. Numbers police space. Space protects health. Health sustains numbers in next year's tax rolls. The cycle is as elegant as any aqueduct arch. Our camera climbs above the rooftops. Lanterns dot main streets at equidistant intervals, 40-pace spacing set by decree so night soil men can see gutter mouths. Their wheelbarrows bear tin tags stamped City of Lyon 1135, copper tags in 1140 iron in 1145. The metals change, the stamp persists. Anyone stealing a tag faces the same penalty as adulterating bread pillory beside the fish market, where public noses serve as jury. Odor, weight, and mark thus govern life together, a trinity of trust. By midnight, the counting house locks its coffers. The chief clerk blows out his candle, satisfied the scales balanced and the ledgers align. Yet he pockets a tiny wax seal bearing the dolphin emblem spoils of a day's fair dealing. When he presses it later onto his son's palm, he will explain that its ridges attest to honest soap, and honest soap preserves health. And preserved health allows cities to rise grander than any single emperor's monument. The boy will smell faint almond and understand commerce as a pact of cleanliness. Point 15. Therefore completes the arc from personal cloth wipes and vinegar flasks to imperial sewer tours, and finally to legal marks that make hygiene measurable, enforceable, and tradable. Where Hadrian institutionalized maintenance, medieval merchants monetized it. Cleanliness became collateral stamped in lead and weighed in brass. The lineage is unbroken clay, drain tiles, Babylonian perfumes, Roman bathhouse ledgers, guild seals, each step converting lived sanitary wisdom into portable trust. And so the grand story that began with fear of waterborne plagues ends with the quiet authority of a scale, tipping true under lamplight, a promise that tomorrow's wool soap or spice will smell exactly as wholesome as today's, no matter how far it travels.